As long as you're there, as long as you're there. Baby, we can do this all night. Keep on second guessing our love, oh love. I don't really care if you don't mind. Baby, we can do this all night. We can do it all night. We can do it all night. Baby, won't you hold tight, hold tight, hold tight. The closer I get, the further you go. I wanna know if I walk away, do you wanna get close? Do you wanna get close? Baby, we can do this all night. Keep on second guessing our love, oh no. I don't really care if you don't mind, don't mind. Baby, we can do this all night. Keep on second guessing our love, oh love. I don't really care if you don't mind. Baby, we can do this.
So, good morning, everybody. It's great to have you with us. It is Jamie here from Educogym, and I am joined this morning by both Jacqui and John. So, we've got a triple whammy to bring you all the latest tips and tricks on what you need to do to get into great shape. Good morning, guys. How are you, Jacqui? Oh, I've got your names back front. I'll have to fix that because that could be confusing.
I think people will work it out.
I think so.
Chat amongst yourselves while I fix that. Oh,
We have the same initials, Jamie. JM.
that's it.
We're
JJ
good
and
with the
J.
J.
Actually. There you go.
Yeah, the three J's.
This could be the extent of our conversation this morning. It's about as
It could
technical
be,
as it's
yeah.
going to get.
Yeah.
So we thought today that we would talk about low carbohydrate diets, ketogenic diets, because there are so many people who have started our 28-day program and they are probably in the midst of it, as are we. So some of us are about, 6 or 7 days in, Jacqui, is that right?
6 days in, and I actually just got a text from a client who has started it for the very first time, telling me she's 4 pounds down in 6 days and 2 inches off her waist. And she doesn't feel like she's on a diet, which is fantastic.
Awesome. If you can get that kind of results, you're laughing. There are obviously a few hurdles that people encounter when they're doing low carbohydrate diets. And I think it does obviously depend a lot on what you've been eating maybe before you start. And then there are a few things that we can talk about that really do make a difference if it's something that you've chosen to do. So John, people often talk about maybe low carbohydrate diets being unsustainable and being maybe difficult to follow. What's your experience having done it and having had clients follow it over the many years that we've been doing this?
I think the main thing is the benefits that people get very early on. And Jacqui just demonstrated there a second ago. And the people very quickly restore some degree of balance. And that's the key, really. You're restoring balance, hormonal balance, if you like. You're not aware it's hormonal balance when you're doing it necessarily, except that you feel so well. So in terms of sustainability, obviously it depends on the level of carbohydrate content in the diet. Obviously, a strict ketogenic diet, people might find that more difficult to sustain over a long period, 6 months or something of that nature, whereas the low carbohydrate is definitely sustainable. There's no question about that. And in general, we are educated as a nation to eat too much carbohydrate. And the beauty about what we do in terms of educating people about Educogym and about the ketogenic diet or any of these diets is actually educating people about the variation in diet, including carbohydrates, the use of carbohydrates, fats, proteins. And it's a very big part of it. You're on a diet, yes, you're on a ketogenic diet, you're on a low carbohydrate diet, but you're actually learning about food and how it affects your body.
It's interesting because if you look at something like the NHS in England, and I think last year, having done a study on a number of people who were suffering from type 2 diabetes, who certainly were pre-diabetic, and they were suggesting almost using ketogenic or low carbohydrate diets as a therapeutic treatment. And I think it's actually going to become part of how they're treating those diseases, which is very interesting. So if, Jacqui, maybe starting out, if people don't really understand what exactly is low carbohydrate, or what is, I mean, obviously maybe the answer is in the name, but maybe if you're looking at something like ketogenic diet, what is it for people maybe hearing it for the first time?
Well, it's funny because, our lady, Mary Delaney, who got an incredible result with us, who lost 6 stone over the last year following the Educo plan. I interviewed her online the other night, and she spoke about, I allowed people to question her on what she did. And she started off with our ketogenic diet, the high fat and protein diet. And she did that for 12 days because we're renowned for that eating plan. And then she switched to what she referred to as the low GI. So what I had to make clear to people who were listening on the call is that low fat and both ketogenic are both low glycemic eating plans. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, obviously the best diet that you're going to do is the one that's sustainable for you. But we have found that in Educogym that the high fat and protein diet, which is ketogenic eating, produces the best result, the fastest result, and it's fantastic for balancing your hormones, like John just said. And it just gives people, when they see such a fast result, that motivation to really keep going with their health and fitness and body shape goals. Because the one thing that I would hear an awful lot is people coming in to me, especially as you get older, and they're saying, I'm doing everything, but I'm not getting results, I'm not seeing results, I'm following all the diets and nothing is producing results. However, the minute we put them on this high fat and protein diet, they get instant results, even if they have underlying health conditions like a thyroid problem, which is very challenging for women when they want to lose body fat. So it's my preference to put people on this particular eating plan if they like those foods. But I will also say that it definitely gets the fastest results, and I'm a huge advocate of it. And I suppose if we go back to when we started, guys, 14 years ago, when we were giving people that eating plan, we were met with a lot of resistance. People going, what, you want me to eat everything I've been told not to eat? And now we fast forward 14, 15 years and it's become a bit of the norm. So people are much more acceptable to eating high fat than they were 15 years ago. And I just like to point out that, again, Educogym, we were pioneering it 15 years ago. So we were doing what everyone wasn't doing 15 years ago. So we are very cutting edge. We're very scientific about the approach that we go with. So therefore, it's about training, diet, and mind. So I don't know if I'm answering your question there, Jamie, but
yeah, I wanted to start you with a nice tricky one. I think what's interesting about ketogenic diet, and I think the first time I tried it was around 2000 or 2001. And at that point, Atkins had maybe made it slightly popular. And so it was some people would have heard of it or would have understood elements of it. But the version that we do really comes from the research that was done in the Middlesex Hospital, where they were showing how different diets helped with weight loss, but not only with weight loss, but actually also with holding on to muscle tissue. And that is absolutely critical. And I think because of people's diets nowadays and how much processed carbohydrate, I think I was looking at a study the other day, and 50 to 60% of people in the UK, Ireland, are eating a diet that has hugely processed carbohydrates, not getting proper fiber, they're getting way too much sugar. And obviously we can see the effect that it's having on people's health, because we're talking at the moment about the pandemic, but what we can really see in terms of people's health is the rates of obesity, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, dementia, Alzheimer's. They're all skyrocketing, and it's a much more sinister and terrifying state of people's health. And we can largely link it to lifestyle factors, particularly when it comes to nutrition and diet. So the main hormone that we're concerned with when we're trying to get people into shape and that we're trying to balance out is insulin, because that has such an impact on obviously your mood, energy levels, whether you feel full or you feel hungry, but also on this incredible hormone called growth hormone, which when you're young, you produce lots of, because you're still growing, and it really has this effect of rejuvenating the body. And when we're training people, that's one we're trying to increase because of the effect that it has. However, insulin and growth hormone work against each other. It's called antagonistically. So from a nutrition point of view, all the diets I suppose we're known particularly for low carbohydrate diets, because often that's the one that people will start with. And if they're doing short-term programs, it might be the only one that they experience. But people who are with us long-term will understand that we really have a very sustainable approach where we're educating people about diet, nutrition, that we're getting them to understand about the importance of low glycemic nutrition, and therefore, and that's really a lifestyle approach. But you can also do low carbohydrate diets as a lifestyle approach. So John, obviously working with people, what have you found works the best, and why have you found that it's that approach is so successful?
Well, the one that gets the results, long-term and short-term, is the ketogenic diet. There's no question about that. So essentially, in this case, the body is compelled to burn fat as its primary source of fuel. You mentioned insulin there. Most people are operating on glucose as their primary source of fuel. In other words, sugars from carbohydrates, potatoes, rice, pasta, all kinds of processed foods. And that's what you're relying on for energy. And this is the reason, of course, why people have poor levels of energy. This is why you have poor outcomes, as you mentioned, diabetes, etc. And there are many other sinister little things that people have which seem to disappear.
Seems to disappear just as John has disappeared. You're back. You disappeared on the word disappear. You disappeared. Yeah.
Disappeared.
This is the power. This is the power of thought here. See, but they do seem to disappear. And like what I find fascinating, actually, watching people when they come in, they're talking about weight loss, and that's what we talk about mostly. Obviously, at the beginning, certainly, but they do also talk to us a little bit about sleeplessness, stiffness, soreness, all kinds of issues with our, you might say, are just achy and issuey and, things of that nature. They all seem to disappear on this diet. And the reason obviously is the removal of sugars, simple sugars, straight away. It has an immediate response. So obviously we see superficially that the body has lost fat, shrunk is the way to describe it, because you're really burning off inches from what I love is that they might say, oh, look at this diet, it's very strong, I don't know how to do it. And you're encouraging them. Day 4, they're standing on the scales and going, oh my God, look at this. And that's the beauty about it. The response is immediate because it's a very efficient diet. Cut the sugars out. The body is compelled to burn fat. Initially, it burns the fat that you're consuming, but ultimately it's burning these fat stores, which are hanging around your tummy and all these unsightly locations that you don't want. It's physiologically bound to burn off this fat, to shrink the body very quickly. That's what I like about it. So with the result, you say to them, do you want to stay on it for another 12 hours? No problem. Why? Because they're getting the outcome that they want. And it's such a big part of weight loss. Look at the amount of people who try weight loss and just don't seem to get anywhere. Why? They lose a pound, they gain a pound, they lose. But if you see sustainable results in the mirror, your clothes are hanging off you very quickly. It's so easy to do. But bear in mind, it's also affecting you at a cellular level, as you mentioned, balancing your hormones, giving you more energy, reversing a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of research, you mentioned it, that's gone into diabetes and many other areas, by the way, which Jacqui, you mentioned when we started out with this. Oh my God, we got serious questions about it. And the first time I did it was 1998. And I remember myself saying, what do you mean? I'm not going to live on that diet. I remember at the time. But, because the guy in question, I gave him a very hard time thinking there's no way. And here was the quote. You ready for this? You can't live on a diet. An Irishman can't live on a diet without potatoes. And I lived long enough to be able to one day work with somebody who said to me, he's an Indian chap, said to me, an Indian man can't live on a diet without rice. And so it is. So we're programmed, you see, to operate in that particular way. So that's what I love about the ketogenic diet. It challenges people's thinking about food.
Yes, and I often think, when people came into it, or do come into us, they're not as bad now. But, if it's the caveman diet, if we go back 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, what did they do? Like, I think the potatoes were discovered in 1800. I'll stand corrected in that. But, if we look at, they were hunters and gatherers. Is it? So
1,500 in various, but go on, Emily.
okay. So, but they went out, they killed the game, the deer. They went fishing. There was nuts and seeds and green leafy vegetables. But there wasn't a lot of rice or potatoes. They didn't have that as staples in their eating plan, and they were healthier. They weren't suffering with all these health issues that people are really affected by nowadays. Mm-hmm. So I really love the high fat and protein approach, and I think if people just educate themselves in that area, I suppose one area that would be really good to cover, Jamie, that we with an issue that we can be faced with is where doctors see people's cholesterol levels and they go, oh my God, get off that high fat diet, you're going to die of a heart attack tomorrow if you don't. And that's very misleading because they're not really looking at the full picture. And I follow a doctor in the States who's a big advocate of the ketogenic kind of eating, and she explains it very well that you need to get a proper read of your cholesterol to understand what's actually happening in the body. So maybe you'd like to speak a bit more about that, Jamie.
Yeah, absolutely. So often when you follow this type of program, you have different types of cholesterol in the body. So you have your HDL, which is recognized as your good cholesterol, high density lipoprotein. And then you have different degrees of the more dense cholesterol. So you have LDL, which is low density lipoprotein. And then you have VLDL, which is very low density lipoprotein. So the basic test doesn't really break up the cholesterol so that you can see which are the more dangerous types. And then you also have to look at it at the full picture, as Jacqui's saying, where you're looking at things like your triglyceride levels, and triglycerides start to appear in the blood when you have excess glucose, and the body is desperately trying to convert it into something so that it doesn't become toxic in the body. So it's actually the balance of the different types of cholesterol in the blood. And then naturally, it's also looking at it over a period of time. So what might initially happen over the short term doesn't necessarily play out in the long term. And if you think about it, what is more healthy? That your cholesterol rises ever so slightly, and probably your HDL more than the other types, or that you're sucking fat off the body and out of the arteries and away from the organs. So from a point of view of the bigger picture, it's worth noting the changes that are happening in the body and the effect that it's having on your overall health. And I think that's absolutely vital. And is there anything, John, that you'd like to add on that point?
Yeah, I think there's just one thing, that the likelihood is when one goes into ketosis, the body will release the triglycerides you mentioned earlier that you may have stored up. It will release that in order to form ketones. So it is that process which will actually bring down your triglycerides. And if you mentioned the VLDL, which is
we've got
and these are the ones that don't really talk about in discussion. I've disappeared again. Sorry,
you froze momentarily.
I froze momentarily. That can happen. But so these are the very VLDL are the ones that are the most sinister. So triglycerides are released in the process of going into ketosis. So the likelihood is you will burn those off. So really it's like a magical formula where your body is compelled to use this fat that apparently you're consuming now, and you will burn it off, and it does this breaking down the lipids in the manner you've just described. So it's not quite as people think, oh, you're going to die of heart attack or something like that.
Yeah. And can I add in there, I think people have to understand too, is that the body also makes cholesterol. It's vital for survival. If we didn't, if we don't have cholesterol, we'll die. Mm-hmm. So, your body will produce more cholesterol than you'll actually ever consume. It's vital for so many different functions in the body. And I think people aren't aware of that either. So, when people are saying, oh, don't eat eggs, don't eat the fat, it's not actually that. There's a genetic play also at part. But I don't think people need to worry too much about that. I just wanted to bring up the whole area of cholesterol because it's one of those areas that we're always faced with.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But we've had a lot of doctors follow a high fat eating plan and check their bloods on a regular basis, and they're fine.
Yeah, and it is worth just saying to anybody who's watching this that, you know, before you do decide to change your nutrition, diet, or exercise program, it is worth consulting your healthcare professional or your GP and taking their advice on board, because it's absolutely vital. And it's great if they're open to different approaches, but obviously we're not recommending that you go against their advice, and it's just really important to note that. And you know, this approach has been studied on a large scale, and it is also worth noting that a low carbohydrate diet or a low fat diet, they actually both work and they both produce similar results over long term. It is interesting, though, to note that I think there's something like 46 studies where a low carbohydrate diet outperformed a low fat diet. Now, it actually had very little to do with the diet itself and more to do with the participants and the level of compliance, because you are dealing with people in real life. And there are some definite benefits that we would notice from people following a low carbohydrate diet. One, this is really important, you don't get hungry. And that is absolutely, that was actually one of the reasons that compliance was so high with low carbohydrate, is people are not thinking about food all the time. The second reason, and I'm sure you guys agree with this, but fat carries all the flavor. So fat tastes good. And it's often what people are looking for when they're even having carbohydrate. It's the combination of what they put with the carbohydrate that makes it interesting and tasty. And the other reason that we really like doing low carbohydrate or ketogenic diets is we can test it. So we can make sure that you're being honest. No, we can make sure that it's working. We can see if it is actually working, but it does seem to help people maybe be a little bit more honest, because they know that on a Monday we're going to race them in for a ketosis test. So that it suddenly the weekends they behave more like saints. So, but are there any other factors that you guys think that that really make it easy to follow, or make it make the levels of compliance so high, I guess?
Well, there's two approaches.
Go on, Jacqui.
Okay, there's two approaches to losing body fat. You know, so when clients come into me, I always say, look, you know, we're all the same. So, you know, we generally will react well to both forms of eating plans. So to lose body fat, you're either going to go low carb and eat more fat and protein, or you're going to do a low fat approach, which you're still taking your protein and a little bit more carbohydrate. The difference between them is that with the high fat diet, you're warmer, you're never hungry. When you go on low fat, you could be colder and you're hungry. So we usually take the approach of putting people initially on the high fat, because they get the result and they start to detox from sugar and adjust, and then they can move on to more of a low fat eating plan. And I think it's important to say too that a lot of our clients can tend to move on to more of a low fat eating plan, because it probably isn't great if you have a lifestyle where you're drinking a lot of alcohol, or if you're eating a lot of chocolate, to be on a high fat eating plan approach. So then a low fat plan is much more sustainable for a person. But, you know, at the end of the day, health is about keeping your food to low glycemic eating, which is keeping your sugars down. And Jamie and I gave a talk there a few months, maybe a month or so back, about insulin and your growth hormone. So it's all about controlling your insulin levels and understanding the foods that will spike your insulin level. So that's a key part. And when clients come into us, we put a huge emphasis on educating them on nutrition. You're not always going to pick that up on the first one or two consultations, because it does take time to, I mean, we're studying this years and we're still learning. When it comes to nutrition, you're always learning. You never know it all, you know. So it's with our clients, like, that's why I often say you're better off to commit to maybe 3 or 4 months, 6 months with us to really get the understanding and the training on nutrition. And all of our clients, and you both will agree, they all say that, oh my God, I'm so much more aware of what I'm eating, and I now understand why what I was doing before didn't work for me, and why the food combining now is giving me the result that I've always been looking for. So John, I interrupted you when we were about to just vote.
I know. Well, I think the point is, what's the best diet? And this is the question you're always asked. What is the best diet? And the truth is, as we know, the best diet is the one you actually do. There is nonetheless a real argument to encourage people to do the ketogenic diet at the beginning. obviously to balance hormones, because the likelihood is if you've been eating, and as you mentioned the lifestyle a moment ago, drinking and perhaps eating processed food, etc., your insulin levels will, well, obviously your insulin production may not be as efficient as it would have been, as it should be perhaps, and it's like the master hormone. So in that process we begin to balance all of that, and it just means that then when you go to the next phase, your body's more efficient in handling perhaps a low carb diet, and we may move on from there. But it also, and this is a big thing really, because there's such poor understanding about nutrition out there right now, very, very poor, to the point where people would arrive in with a bottle. We're now starting a health program, stick it on the desk in the consultation, and it's perhaps a very sugary drink, we won't mention the name, begins with an L, and someone said that this is very healthy for them, and it's dreadful. Or they'll say, I'm on low-fat drinks. I only take low-fat drinks, which obviously they mean low-sugar drinks. But nonetheless, so the education is poor. So and you know what are the most popular books that are out there? Are cookery books, food books, particularly ones in relation to some well-known individual who lost weight using this. So people are interested in this, but they're obviously not doing it because the obesity continues to rise, illness continues to rise. But what we're actually doing is saying, okay, look, I want you to do this apparently strange diet. Really, we would say we're taking you off this strange diet called the Western diet, and we want you to try this diet and see the effect that it has. Now there's a variation of this, which may be low carb, and see the effect that that has. And now we have a further variation, and so it goes. The best way to learn, particularly about food, is to actually do it. Do the diet, see the effect that it has. And then each person, as they learn, they teach their kids and teach their husband, wife, whatever it is. And so that goes out around the community. This is why it is, of course, that maybe 15 years later, we're in a Educogym from when we started, where people thought, oh my God, this is crazy stuff. Years later, people are saying, yeah, I know about this diet, my friend did it, etc. And it's just because of that sort of wave that's gone out around the community. And I think this is a big thing that for me, that's been the biggest difference, is that we are seeing the beginnings of education about food. And this is where the answer lies in the end. Whichever diet you do to get you into shape. Now, I'm going to say there's a nice process which we use. We've been using it for years, and to try and bring the people through. So through a Juco style, we educate them into understanding about food. But in the end, if they begin to understand this one is okay, this one's okay, but together they're deadly. I mean, that is a combination that's so important. So you understand fats on the ketogenic diet, and maybe you'll understand, therefore, the absence of sugar and how damaging that particular white substance is.
Absolutely. So let's say somebody was thinking about doing ketogenic diet. So what sort of level of carbohydrate should they be limiting themselves to? Either of you guys, if you want to jump in and answer that. But what are we trying to eliminate exactly, and what level of carbohydrate are we aiming for?
I suppose, Jamie, if we first explain. John, if it was a quiz, I'd be winning now because I keep getting in just before you. So I suppose I always explain carbohydrates in 3 levels: low density, medium density, and high density carbohydrates. So your low density carbohydrates are going to be green veg, green salads, acidic fruits. They're very low in carbohydrates, meaning they're very low in sugar. So they're great for your waistline, they're great for your circulation, they're great for your life force and your health. Then you've got the medium density carbohydrates called complex carbohydrates. And those foods will be things like, your sweet potato, brown rice, whole grain ribena. They're good health foods, but generally what we would recommend on our high fat and protein eating plan is that you have to eliminate those initially to really get a result. And then your high density carbohydrates is all the white stuff. So your white bread, your pasta, your cakes, your biscuits, your sweets, root vegetables. cooked carrot, I always say to clients, has as much sugar as white bread. And I think Irish people are always fascinated with that one, because usually when Irish people go on an eating plan, they'll say diet to lose weight. They'll cut out their potatoes in the evening and they will heap their plate with all the cooked root vegetables. So I often say you may as well eat the potato. But anyway, you need to get rid of all those high density carbohydrates. And so when you refer to low carb, or the level of low carb, obviously on our 12-day fat and protein eating plan, we purposely restrict carbohydrates to probably about 20 grams. It's very high fat, so now you're using fat for your fuel for energy rather than sugars as your fuel for energy. And you've got your protein in there. But when people are more on a lifestyle carbohydrate, they can go up to 50, 70 grams of carbs a day and still eat the fat or the protein and get results, but maybe at a slower rate. So it's all about manipulating those macronutrients to produce the results, almost like you'd look at your calories at a certain point to produce results. But John, would you want to add anything there?
No, that was a perfect answer. I just had a tiny bit, just in terms of visuals on the plate. If people could just think in terms of 3 times fat to 1 time protein, so that if you're looking at your plate, you should have that additional amount of fat on the plate over your protein, and then obviously your nice green vegetables as you described there a moment ago, which you may have a little bit of fat on as well, by the way. But that is the key, because you need to have the excess fat in the diet each time, at each meal, at each portion, essentially.
Yes.
And that then compels the body to burn that fat as your source of energy. And that's the thing that people don't know. How does this work? I mean, how could it possibly be that you eat more fat and you burn fat? Well, I mean, as I said earlier, your removal of sugars, bread, all those carbohydrates you mentioned, the less dense or the more dense ones, if you like, the potatoes, rice, pasta. If you remove those, then your body it needs energy. So in the first few days, you might be thinking, where's my energy? Well, I have to use something here to burn. And essentially, of course, then it switches from burning sugars as your primary source of fuel into burning fats. And it is very important. They're very separate. It's like switching from oil to gas. You can't mix them. So it's one or the other. But once they've done that, of course, then they begin to work away. But it is important that you have excess fat. And by the way, we'd like to try and you to think in terms of healthier fats, olive oil, avocado, things of that nature, if possible. And so it's 3 times fat to 1 time protein. That's just from a visual looking at your plate.
I think that's very important, and just for people that are starting to think this is starting to sound very complicated, it's really not. In fact, in the original study, what the interesting thing that they told the participants to do was literally just reduce the amount of carbohydrate you're having, increase the amount of protein, and increase the amount of fats. And it was really that simple. They weren't weighing out. They were actually in a hotel, so they weren't weighing out their food. And it was an all-you-can-eat buffet. So they had access to just about everything. But that was the approach they took. And that really is actually a very simple approach. So it's, as Jacqui's saying, you're keeping your carbohydrate levels between 20 and 30 grams. You do have to make sure, we're going to talk about the mistakes that some people make. You do definitely need to make sure that you increase your fats. And you want to have your protein, particularly if you're training, at around about minimum of a gram per pound of body weight. And what you'll find is, you can test this. So you can get keto sticks. They're little stick that you pee on the end of, and it'll tell you if you're burning fats, and it'll come up with a color, and that will allow you to, sorry for any background noise here. It sounds like there's a small war going on there, but the keto sticks will tell you if you're burning fat, and we'll go into a small bit more detail about that as well. And as the guys are rightly saying, in studies actually, people still lost weight between 30 grams and about 104 grams of carbohydrate. So, but different effects happen to different levels. It does depend on the person's age. It can depend on the person's metabolism. It can depend on your previous lifestyle. There's all sorts of factors. So sometimes you do need to change it around based on the results. So there's no point in sort of just taking the approach of, I'm going to just follow this and I'm not going to change it. everybody, while we're all made up the same, we are all different. And so how we respond to different diets will vary dramatically. And I'm just trying to think. So what's the common mistakes that people will make when they're following this approach? I mean, we've seen them all, but Jacqui, do you want to maybe talk about a couple of mistakes that you've seen people make and what they can do about it?
Well, yeah, one area I would like to highlight for people listening is that, because a lot of people are going out getting the vaccine as well right now, but in my experience, and you can agree, I'm sure you will agree with this, that when we put people on a plan, especially the high fat plan, if they go on an antibiotic or if they go on even if they take a paracetamol for a headache or something, it can tend to interfere with their progress and stall things for maybe a week or two to balance out. That's what I have found. So I'd like people just to become aware of that. No matter what eating plan you're following right now, always bear that in mind. The other area that I have found that can be troublesome and people don't even realize it, I found this out through trial and error through years, is that, you could be questioning them, your God, it's not showing me result, what are you eating? And, I figured out one time that people were taking Baroccas and vitamin C's, the fizz in the morning that have a sugar hit in it. And that's spiking their insulin and their blood sugar levels. Another area that I have found that people, if they're having chewing gum, gum, but I'm eating sugar-free gum. Yeah, but your sugar-free gum is pumped with carbohydrates, which will spike your insulin. And it's all about really understanding your foods that are going to drive up the insulin. So there are little areas, and what you said there, Jamie, like as I've gotten older, because I actually first did that high-fat diet, would you believe, when I was 16 years of age. And because I was just fascinated, I started reading all about nutrition and insulin and all of that at 16, and I wanted to try these eating plans. And I remember the first 5 days on that high-fat diet, my waist literally, shrank. And I've done it obviously on and off for the last number of years. And I have noticed since I've turned 40, it's definitely, you have to manipulate those macros more. So that's why I suppose when clients are working with us on an individual consultation basis, we can tweak things like that, because, one shoe doesn't fit all. It can, but you may need to vary it and tweak it depending on if a person's on medication or if their age comes into it. And John, you may even add to that because, you're just a little bit older. So,
where are you going with that one?
But you don't look at John, so I know I'm after telling all our listeners now that,
I think the first thing, this manipulation of the foods you're eating is massively important. The younger people, they will get a result very quickly, and as we get older, but they can still get results. And one of the things that I find, firstly, before I say what I'm going to say, I don't think people should attempt a ketogenic diet without supervision. At all. And I mean, working with some characters like ourselves who've been doing this a long time, because there are so many little variables in there that make the difference. And people do make sort of daft mistakes, I have to say, in relation to, such as having little drinks. I mean, I just had a little mouthful of my waddy or something. She says, won't make any difference. Well, sure will it. I have milk in my tea. Sure, you can't have tea without milk. So there are simple things that people continue to do. And this is why not only the initial consultation, but the little assessments along the way, where, as you mentioned, Jacqui, you're asking them questions. Are you doing, even though it says it on the diet sheet, you're still saying, are you having any bread? Are you having any milk? Are you having any yogurt? I mean, but yogurt's healthy. So it's not to do with that. It's to do with this is part of the education, of course, as we mentioned. But I really think that people should only do this with supervision. It's just to tweak those different things. So one of the things that I find that if we're really trying to get this right is the increase in protein as we get older, and perhaps the reduction of the vegetables in your diet, believe it or not. So for instance, some of the big floury vegetables like broccoli, as an example, is quite a carby veg. So it can actually slow down the ketogenic process. I mean, it just depends on the individual. And that's something that I've found either with myself or people that are a little bit older. And that can be tricky because people are used to having, as I mentioned, the plate. So they have their meat, that have their veg, and there's a big hole. Where's my potatoes gone? So they normally
More
fill up
veg.
that hole with vegetables. So, but that's not actually necessarily the best approach. So we have to watch that as we get older, because that is just more carbohydrate, actually, and
Yes.
particularly in one sitting. So
Yeah, and
sorry,
it does depend on what you're trying to achieve. Particularly if you're losing weight, you might you're going to need to restrict your carbohydrate. If you're maintaining and it's more low carbohydrate as a lifestyle, you can increase the level of carbohydrate. So it really is going to depend on where you're at. And even if we just look at it from a point of view of statistically, if you look at the rate of pre-diabetes and diabetes, but even people who are pre-diabetic, I think in Ireland it's 1 in 4 people are pre-diabetic. In America, it's 1 in 3. In the UK, it's very similar, 1 to 3 to 1 to 4. In the Middle East, it's 1 to 2. In China, it's 1 to 2 people are 1 in 2 people are pre-diabetic. So, you know, it might be a case initially that you're really trying to balance out the hormones and you're trying to increase the insulin sensitivity, you're trying to reduce the level of triglycerides. So at the beginning, you might need a stricter approach. And then when it becomes more lifestyle approach, then you can have a broader version of it. It's also interesting to note, I don't know if people watching this have ever come across Weston Price, who was a dentist and an incredible man. He traveled around the world in the early 1900s and visited different indigenous people who were still on their indigenous diet, and then compared them to people living very close by from the same country that were on a more Western diet. And he noticed that there were all different variations of diets for indigenous people who were on their natural diet. And some people had very low carbohydrate diets and were incredibly healthy. And other indigenous people were maybe more on a sort of a low, what we would know as a low fat diet, more low glycemic with some types of carbohydrates. So there was a huge variation. All of those indigenous people were very, very healthy. So there's a broad spectrum of nutritional approaches that will produce very healthy individuals. We do know that there is one approach that produces very unhealthy individuals, and that's this very processed, high sugary diet. Now there are always trade-offs. No matter what diet you follow, there's going to be trade-offs. So it's funny that from Weston Price's research, you could see that people who were following maybe a diet that was higher in carbohydrate and much lower in fat, they tended to have a bigger waistline. They tended to have more fat stores on the body. But people who were on a low carbohydrate diet with maybe more fats, they had more arthritis and more inflammatory related conditions. Now, obviously in much older people. So generally there were different variations depending on the foods that people were eating, but they didn't have very high levels of heart disease. They didn't have diabetes. They didn't have high levels of cancer. And then he measured all sorts of other things: facial structure, bone structure, tooth decay. They were all very, very low on natural or indigenous diets. And they were only really an issue in people who were following very Western type processed, high sugary, high carbohydrate diets. And as Jacqui said, you know, it is down to the type of carbohydrates. And so age is going to come into it. The type of result that you want to achieve is going to come into it. The mistakes we would see people make when they're following a low carbohydrate diet is they cut the carbohydrates and they cut the fat, and then they have no source of energy. That's one of the biggest ones, because we're so conditioned not to eat fat, and then suddenly we're cutting out carbohydrates but reluctant to eat fat, and then you're surviving on protein as a source of energy, and it's not a great source of energy. With protein can vary dramatically, so it will depend on the person's insulin sensitivities. Some people will be able to manage much more protein and will get into ketosis, and some people will have to have much less protein. And actually, in research, it's very different to a low glycemic or carbohydrate-based diet. You can actually get incredible results, hold on to a lot of muscle with much lower levels of protein than you would do on a low-fat diet. It just seems to be the way that you metabolize protein when it's combined or when it has fat in the diet as well. So that's just an interesting thing. And I agree with John. It does really require supervision. So what do we find that people will suffer from most? What are the sort of common complaints that people will have? let's say the first 5 days, the dreaded keto flu, how can people avoid that? Or what do you guys suggest to people to avoid it? Because people listen to this will go, oh God, yeah, day 4, day 5. Oh, I don't want to go through that again. So how do you avoid that? What's the best thing to do? Maybe Jacqui, you go first.
Yeah, okay, I'll go first. So just to say as well, because one thing that really annoys me is when people say, I'm not eating any carbohydrates. I don't eat carbs. You should never eliminate a macronutrient. So you are eating carbohydrates, but you are eating the good high life force carbohydrates. So I just wanted to point that out first. But when you start the high fat and protein eating plan, I always advise clients, especially if they're coming off a high sugar plan, that day 3 or 4, they could literally hit a wall. Because what's happening is, and John explained it earlier, is that your body is switching from burning sugar for energy to burning body fat for energy. So when you're not taking in the carbohydrates, the highly sugary carbohydrate foods, your body no longer has that. And then it goes to these glycogen reserves in your body. And once it uses up all the glycogen reserves, it goes, oh my God, I need fuel. So then it starts to burn your body fat for energy. And when that transition is happening, you can just feel, I describe it to my clients as that you'll just feel flat. It's almost like you just, you're tired, you want to maybe crawl into bed, and it generally lasts just a day, maybe 2. But once you go past it, it's like, boom, this light bulb goes on and you have energy, you feel incredible, you start to feel your waist in. So it's that switch over can be challenging sometimes for people. And I think it's very important that, you point that out. And as John said, it's so important to, if you're going with this approach to eating, that you have somebody who's experienced with it. Because, I mean, I've had clients, Jamie, nearly crying at my desk going, I can't do this. And I'm saying, please just get through this day and it'll be all over. So, there are those challenges. And then, of course, if you have somebody who hasn't been on a high sugar eating plan prior to starting the ketogenic diet, they might sail through it and not feel any of the symptoms. But that's where our food supplements really come into play as well, because I just know that I've done it myself. I've done the ketogenic without the food supplements, with the food supplements. I've done it without the training, but I just know that the combination of the food supplements with the nutrition and obviously the training gets you the best result. And the food supplements really fill in the gaps there to help you to firm up the muscle tissue and to keep your energy levels elevated throughout those, be it a low fat plan or a ketogenic plan. Those food supplements would play a big part.
John, what about you? Any approach that you would take with people in that sort of keto flu state?
I think the first thing, well, for some people, they reach for coffee, and we're not going to complain if that's what they want to do, maybe with a little bit of cream. That's okay, because it gives them a little bit of a boost. And that's absolutely fine. Sometimes we might give them a little snack, which I won't tell you on air, because again, it has to be done at certain times in different ways. So I'm not going to say that. So there's certain ideas about that. But probably the big one is the amino energize. And taking that between meals in this situation is very, very important, because you will get the slump. There's no question. It's be bigger or larger, but that's okay, because that means your body is switching. Even if you're not on the ketogenic diet, even if you've just given up one, herbal food, whatever it might be, you're just giving that up for a while, you may have a little bit of withdrawal anyway. So that's a natural process. Just a thing to remember. That is a natural process. So to help with that, we'd give them amino energize, particularly between meals, and that, of course, is amino acids. Which is basically building blocks of protein, which affects every cell in your body, and it gives you, guess what, energy. So I think that's a very important one. And as I mentioned, coffee is a good go-to as well. And there's a little snack which I'll telling you about.
And can I just say also, Jamie, just with fruit, because the way, for the first 12 days we 99% of the time say no fruit, and people are always fascinated with that. Oh my God, no fruit. And I always make it clear to people, listen, fruit is high sugar. Fruit is Mother Nature's sugar, sweet to us, right? So, it is healthy and it is very good for you, but it depends on your objective. So there's healthy eating, but there's eating for fat loss. So, if you're eating for fat loss, you just can't be taking in a lot of fruit. you have to really minimize your fruit intake. So that's one area that we're always challenged on as well.
Absolutely. We do, a lot of the plans would recommend grapefruit. So you do get some fruit in the morning, and the grapefruit's amazing. It's got citric acid for your citric acid cycle, gives you loads of energy. It also has fiber to help to keep things moving. And so, yeah, I absolutely, when we do reduce the amount of fruit dramatically. And I think that makes a big difference. Some of the other things that can also make a difference when you follow a low carbohydrate diet, often you're using up, as Jacqui's mentioned, your levels of glycogen, which is your stored carbohydrate. And stored carbohydrate has a certain amount of water attached to it. When you use it, your body does tend to excrete water on this diet, and it's really excess water and fluid. Now, when that happens, it can often flush out quite a lot of your natural mineral salts. So things like sodium and things like magnesium. And when that happens, it is worth making sure that you keep up your levels of sodium and magnesium in particular. And that actually can stop you from going through that keto flu. Sometimes it's almost like a slight dehydration effect, which can make it seem like the detox is even stronger. And having about a teaspoon of salt throughout the day, I've seen different people's approaches to you put a teaspoon of salt into a little bowl, and you just make sure that you use that throughout the day, and that can make an enormous difference. I find that when I keep my sodium up, I don't get that keto flu. The same thing with magnesium. Other people will experience because they're suddenly reducing a lot of fiber from the diet. So maybe they're used to eating a lot of grains, and they'll have a lot of fiber in their diet. Then they'll follow this ketogenic diet. Again, there is because the water is flushed out is one part of it, but they can become quite bunged up or constipated. What do we typically do to help people who are becoming very constipated on a ketogenic diet? John, I'm getting better at this.
Magnesium. Okay, getting better at this. Magnesium is obviously, you're mentioning minerals and salts here, so it's something I'd forgotten earlier. But yeah, there's something we would normally recommend, that they would take magnesium with their food, essentially, really, certainly twice a day, and that will make a big difference. You mentioned the grapefruit as well. Obviously, it assists. Not everybody, we wouldn't put everybody on the grapefruit. And sometimes we might start them without it and see how we get on. But then we might introduce that at some point then. So they're the two that I'd particularly use. I mean, after all, they are lacking, or at least it appears they're lacking in fiber on this particular diet. There are tweaks on that too, but essentially that can cause then some degree of constipation. We don't want constipation because obviously it slows the whole process in every sense. So they're the ones I'd use.
Yeah, it's actually worth noting. Go for Jacqui. Sorry, apologies.
Just magnesium. I think magnesium is a very important one that people, even if they're not going to go on one of these eating plans, like a lot of people can suffer with cramps, like leg cramps, muscular cramps, and that's a huge indication that your body is lacking magnesium. But also, in my experience, the magnesium citrate is the best. It's an organic form that's very readily absorbed. So, I do think your types of magnesium that you take in are important to look at as well, because I've had clients go off and pick up one in the pharmacy and they just don't get the result they should be getting from it. And it's important also to let people know that we are still allowing you eat carbohydrates in the form of green veg and green salads, but you have to remember the soil is depleted of all these minerals nowadays. You'd have to be eating buckets of the stuff to try to get in the magnesium levels that you need. So it's important to bear that in mind also. Go for it, Jamie.
Yeah, absolutely. I forget now what I was going to say typically.
Well, I just might add to what Jacqui's saying. Bear in mind, a lot of people will come to us in the first instance already depleted in minerals, and so they probably need magnesium before we start discussing anything of that. So that's a big part. Effectively, people aren't just overweight; they're suffering from malnutrition. So, and this is because they're eating foodless foods. So they are going to be malnourished with magnesium, with sodium. And obviously, so therefore, what we'd love them to do is to take every supplement we have on the shelf. But again, that's the same thing with regard to nutrition or a diet. Well, that is which one is going to tick the boxes and which is one are they actually going to comply with. So therefore, magnesium would be pretty much a mainstay, I would have thought, in any diet that we do. Obviously, we would also be looking at some point, perhaps not at the very beginning, but in calcium, and that might be then down to a protein drink. And then one of the big ones, of course, are the amino acids, amino energized, and of course, the amino ore, which is the great one for helping assist release growth hormone and burning fat, which is another thing. Of course, that whole ketogenic diet is about getting the body to release growth hormone. So when you mentioned, obviously, my age, one of the big things about a ketogenic diet is it's a rejuvenating diet. It balances your hormones, gets your body to release that little bit of growth hormone. Look, when you're looking at a baby, they're doubling and trebling in size each time they sleep because they're releasing huge amounts of growth hormone. As we get older, we release less and less. The Western diet encourages the opposite. It gets to suppress the release of growth hormone. This is the thing that keeps you active, alive, young, it works for your skin. How much do ladies, you'd be better able to answer this one, Jacqui, how much do ladies spend every year on things for their skin, etc., instead of thinking about what's inside that causes the skin? It's the biggest organ in the body. How do we feed it? So, and we deplete ourselves of growth hormone, which is the youthful hormone, one that keeps us stronger, fitter, healthier, more vibrant in how we think and how we act. So that's the great thing about this ketogenic diet. It balances that and then causes that process effectively to turn around. With the aging process, loss of muscle, your hormones are going awry, shall we say, insulin resistance, all that process, all the aging process, this turns it around. So I know there's some complicating issues about it, but the rewards of a ketogenic diet are so great. By the way, I lived on it when I used to do bodybuilding a million years ago. So you can actually form solid tissue with it. You can get into great shape with it, grow muscle on it. So you might think it's a weight loss diet alone. It's not, frankly. There are many variations of it. Sorry, gets very excited about this diet, as you can see. Sorry.
Yeah, no, well, it makes such a difference. I mean, the results on it are absolutely incredible. I'm just trying to think what one of the things when we just talk about digestion and maybe becoming constipated, the real issue, one of the real issues with constipation is that often it's your waste system. So, you're trying to get rid of hormones, and when you're losing fat often stores a lot of your hormones. So you do need those hormones to leave the body. And if you get constipated, all that is recirculating and you will not feel very well on it. So you must make sure that your digestion is moving, and things like the vegetables, the salads, nuts, seeds, and grapefruit, that will all help with fiber. But often people will need to have magnesium because they just could, as John said, and Jacqui, both of you have mentioned, that they could be just quite low in magnesium. So it's an approach then, really, just to sum it up, because I'm aware of that we've that we're nearly on the hour mark. So I'm aware that people are interested in trying this approach, but really, to sum it up, you're reducing levels of carbohydrate to get yourself into ketosis. You can test it. I did say we would mention it. You can buy those ketone strips. Keto Sticks is the brand that we get. You can get them in most pharmacies, and that'll help you to test it. We do think that doing this approach is better under supervision. A low carbohydrate diet where you're just slightly reducing and cutting out bread and pasta and rice and things like that is hugely beneficial. But a ketogenic diet, when you get into ketosis, you're really bringing carbohydrates to a very low level. The type of protein matters, the type of fats that you're having. If you're older, you may want to reduce the levels of saturated fat. So you may not want to just eat lots and lots of saturated fat. The makeup of a lot of the protein foods that we eat nowadays has changed a lot. The balance of fats in those foods are very different to what they were traditionally. So you probably do need to be aware of that. Farmed animals, farmed fish, it's just the oils are different. We would recommend that you're eating more of the healthy fats, making sure that you get in plenty of omega-3 oils for those anti-inflammatory properties, and you may not want to eat lots and lots of saturated fat, particularly as you get older. Anything else that we haven't covered that we want to just add in? I think we've covered most of the things. John?
Just one thing, and that is the anti-inflammatory effect of the ketogenic diet. I think that people forget this one and probably don't know about it. So, for instance, people who get a lot of pain, for instance, they may have fibromyalgia or any of these things where they just have mysterious pains. And what they found is that, like, okay, look, the ketogenic diet was particularly pioneered by Johns Hopkins University of the States for issues in relation to, sorry, the word's gone on the head. But anyway, anyway, it's gone from me for a moment. So it's the one that did the most research, obviously. So, and what they've discovered was adenosine was the thing that's released in the process of the ketogenic diet. And that's the thing, is an anticonvulsive. So that stops the children from having fits, which is what the original research was about. So that's what happened. It is also
Epilepsy.
An anti-inflammatory. Epilepsy was the word.
Epilepsy.
Thank you very much. It just went from me there. So, but that is where the original research was done. I mean, they started this 50, 60 years ago. That's when the original started doing this. But now they've discovered the same thing is suppressing pain. Why? Because it removes the activity, or reduces the activity in the neural pathway. So we're beginning to realize this is why they're doing so much research now. We're going to see it in a lot of different areas for the future. In the future, perhaps MS, Parkinson's. We can't make any claims about it. So the anti-inflammatory effect was the point I wanted to make anyway. That's a big thing. So if people have mysterious little things when they come into us, the first thing to say, I tell you what, going to get you on this ketogenic diet, and it's going to make a massive difference to you.
Yeah, brilliant.
There's a metabolic health summit that happens every year, and they missed last year because of COVID to celebrate the 100th year of ketogenic diets and how they use them in treating epilepsy, type 1 diabetes, but that summit is happening in April. So the metabolic health summit.
There you go. I think we've done our best to cover most of what we've learned over, I think we probably have, I hate to think about it, but we've about 60 or 70 years worth of experience on low carbohydrate and ketogenic diets between us. And we've obviously worked with thousands of people as well. So we've seen the effect that it's had on a huge number of people. So we really enjoy the approach. I do have to emphasize it's not the only approach. As we've discussed, it's really about low glycemic nutrition and not low carbohydrate nutrition. But because of the state of people's health, it can be a great place to start. And if you were looking to do this approach, what we would recommend is that you're really cutting out those high density carbohydrates that Jacqui's talking about, the real sugary ones, and that would make an enormous difference. Increase your levels of vegetables, salads, have maybe some good quality fruit that's in season in the morning, and then increase your protein. And really, if you did that, you'd notice an enormous difference in a very short period of time. That would make it an incredible impact on your health. So for everybody watching, we really appreciate that you joined us, and thank you. I have seen some comments coming in, and I really appreciate those. If you're watching this later, we really hope that you have enjoyed it, and do leave us any questions. We're happy to answer any questions on a weekly basis. We would love to have you guys participate watching it. And to Jacqui and to John, thank you very much for taking time out on a Saturday morning. It gives me a break from the kids.
Thank you.
It's purely selfish, I have to be honest. So thanks guys, and we will see everybody next week at 10:30, and we will have a new topic for you then. Thanks everybody, and goodbye.